Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is... yes.
Previously on Coffee with Kenobi.
Having the good fortune to meet Eunice on 2 occasions and interviewing him once, that he is super charming, super down to earth, and incredibly tall. So he's going to be fun. People will love him.
Wow, he's tall. It's cool. I'm glad he's tall.
Corey, you think you're tall? No.
Yeah, I think I'm tall.
He's
taller than me.
He's much taller than you.
Great.
And you're a striking man. Don't get me wrong.
Someone to look up to. That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly.
This is Vanessa Marshall, Harrison Dula from Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
Just a taste of the kind of chemistry that myself, Tom, and Corey have on each CWK pour over. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Coffee with Kenobi, show number 163. We are your spoiler-free place for Star Wars discussion, analysis, rhetoric, and the best travel tips this side of the galaxy. I'm your host, Dan Z, drinking One Nation coffee out of my Coffee with Kenobi coffee mug in honor of what we get to do in April at Star Wars Celebration, which I will talk about in a few moments. Coffee with Kenobi is brought to you by MEI and Mouse Fan Travel. For all of your travel needs to the Disney theme parks and the cruise lines, as well as anywhere you want to go on vacation, be sure to go to www.mousefantravel.com, the official travel agency of Coffee with Kenobi. On CWK, I invite you to join me as we think about the mythology of Star Wars in a whole new way, and maybe laugh a little bit in the process. You are here with your Star Wars family as we go to our favorite coffee shop and talk some Star Wars. On today's show, Randy Therio returns after a very brief hiatus as we talk about major differences between the canonical Star Wars and the Legends line. Tom has the news, and we have much more to discuss in that segment. So pull up a chair, grab your favorite coffee mug, and let's have some coffee with Kenobi.
And now, let's see what's brewing in the Star Wars universe this week.
It has finally been officially announced on the Star Wars Celebration website that Coffee with Kenobi is returning to the Celebration podcast stage. It will be myself, Tom Gross, and Corey Clubb, and we're going to have a lot of surprises and giveaways and so much more coming later in the upcoming weeks, including the date and time, which of course would be very important for you to know so you could join us there. And we cannot wait to look up and see all your happy smiling faces so we have some Star Wars conversation, and maybe you will get to be a part of the show as well.
So who talks first? You talk first? I talk first.
Joining us today for a cup of coffee is someone you might recognize from, not that long ago. His name is Randy Therio. He is, of course, from Legends Library and so many other great things. Randy, welcome back to the show.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for having me back, especially in such a short amount of time. I'm always loving the idea of joining you in conversation. So,
well, and you were at the beginning of the last show too for the clip we always put at the beginning.
That was kind of big deal stuff for me.
That was fun. It was great. I was happy to do it. You always have great things to say, and I wanted people to know, hey, this is the kind of stuff we're going to talk about. And this topic for today is inspired by Mr. Daft Prawn on Twitter. He's a great supporter of the show, great guy, good friend of ours. And I put out the message, hey, what do you guys want us to talk about? Do you have any ideas for topics? And he said he wanted us to look at the canonical timeline and what was added as well as what was removed from the Legends line for these current stories. And there's no one better than you and Luke, of course, but Luke is otherwise, he's in hyperspace, so he's not able to join us today. Luke Siders from Legends Library, of course, but we have got Randy with us, who's, of course, the A-team for this. So I knew you'd be perfect for this. Randy, there's a lot of stuff here. Before we talk about this, though, I want to point out, and I've pointed this out many times, it's been verified by Lucasfilm, verified by Steve Sansweet, verified by lots of people. Nothing was necessarily removed canonically because Legends was always entertaining, always fun, always had some stronger stories and some that didn't work as well, but it was never canonical. So nothing has been robbed from the canonical Star Wars universe. It has certainly become a minefield for Dave Filoni and the story group and Lucasfilm to pull from and to utilize into their stories and storytelling. But because Disney took over, they wanted to have a clean slate, a tabula rasa, so that they could do what they wanted to do with these stories and have creative freedom to do so. So it's really the best of both worlds. And I think so far, Randy, that it's worked out rather beautifully.
I believe it has too. I know that there's been some criticism, especially, well, if I'm honest, I was really affected in a negative way initially by taking the Legends storylines or the Legends storyline timeline and just kind of putting it aside for a new storyline, a canon storyline. But since then, have really enjoyed the new story, the new canon storyline. Not as much as Legends, because I was so emotionally invested. I think the things that I miss the most are really the conclusions of the storylines that we were all so emotionally invested in, that are Legends fans, or that were expanded universe fans and now Legends fans. I would say for those that don't really get that, it's equivalent to having the Clone Wars just stopped abruptly, and right. the loss. That's kind of what it felt like. That was a lot like what it felt like for us when Legends was just kind of stopped. And so, but since then we've I have come to a place where I really appreciate both and really have enjoyed both timelines. And like all creative outlets and creative products, there's good and bad. So there's our favorites and our not so favorites. So that kind of goes with the territory.
Right. And I think that is certainly a positive thing. I mean, critical thinking and intellectual honesty are paramount to a good Star Wars conversation, which again is why I'm glad to have you back for a cup of coffee. And that what you said is very, very true. And I agree. And it's very valid, whether you like the Legends line or the canonical line, or you like both, or you're still marinating and picking and choosing. That is great. That is what it's all about. There's plenty out there for us to enjoy. The Legends line gave us a lot of great stuff. It also did some things that they went a different direction with. And some of those things I think were excellent changes. And some I think, well, I guess it remains to be seen. The disadvantage to having this conversation now in January of 2019 is that we haven't seen episode 9 yet. We don't even know the title of episode 9, but we do have enough of a sample size to dive in. And Randy and I were spitballing. He had some excellent ideas that we're going to run with. So the first thing we're going to talk about in this first segment is the role of the Force. What has changed about the role of the Force and what seems to have carried over?
Well, I think originally, George Lucas comes from a mindset of kind of relativism, and that all their whatever's right for you, what is your own truth. And I think when he first set out to create the Star Wars galaxy, Star Wars universe, and even the worldview of Star Wars, in itself, he had this idea of kind of including all worldviews into, having a representation of all worldviews in the Star Wars universe. The problem is that at the very end, somebody had to stand on something. Someone at some point had to stand on principle and make a statement to say, no, this is truth. And this is something that I've talked about in the past on other episodes, other podcasts as well, is that, when Luke Skywalker throws his lightsaber down and says, no, you've lost. I'm a Jedi like my father before me. He's basically claiming an absolute, and all relativism goes out the window. So that coupled with, there's light and there's dark, there's right and wrong, there's the Empire, there's the rebellion. And now how things have changed with the canon, which you are right when you say that, we don't know. We're kind of at a disadvantage because we don't know how this is going to conclude. Since the new canon has kind of come into play, there's a big or a large theme, or kind of like a meta theme that's all about balance. It's no longer about dark and light. Now it's about the balance between the two. Even Snoke yells out in disgust, saying you are unbalanced. And the idea of Rey stepping, without any reserve, stepping in or stepping toward the darkness, and how scared Luke was when she did that. It just kind of proves that there's a change in the, I don't know how to say it, but there's a change in the worldview or the galaxy view, or however you want to say it. There's a change in the philosophy and how the Force works, where before it was light and dark. Now maybe the Force is still the Force, but it's how our characters relate to the Force has changed. It's not light and dark. It's not, right and wrong. Now it's balance between the two. So
really, see, I still see it very much as right and wrong, as good selfless decisions versus selfish, purely manipulative reasons. I mean, if you look at The Last Jedi, everything that Rey and Kylo do in their interactions with one another through these connections that Snoke has engineered, and before and after that amazing lightsaber duel, one is driven to help the other, which would be Rey, while the other is purely trying to use her as a tool so that he can get his way, so he can get what he wants, which is cleared light and dark. The balance I think that Snoke is referring to in that instance is more about being centered as opposed to, what it means to truly be balanced in the Force. And that's something I think we could do an entire show on as well. What I mean? I mean, to me, a Cliff Notes version or Spark Notes version, I guess I should say, for you millennials out there, is balance in the Force means there's equal amounts of good and bad. And when the Emperor is in power, the balance is off because there's so much more evil in the galaxy. It's not the eradication of evil. That's not balance. That would be disingenuous too, because in the world that there is good and bad. But it's more trying to find a way to center it. And then I guess, it remains to be seen how that works. But how did that work in the Legends line? You said that the Force had on a different tone. To me, the Force in the Legends line was very much even more organic than it is with midichlorians, because they had different creatures and entities, Timothy Zahn's, Heir to the Empire in that trilogy. There were creatures in that, or even the Yuzong Vong, that could impact the Force and change the effectiveness of the Force. There's really not a lot of that in the canonical Star Wars.
No, there isn't, and I think part of that was, it was Lucas's influence. I have this just recollection that I don't think that Lucas was a big fan of having the Force squelch, like the Salamiri or the Yuzong Vong kind of rendered it powerless, or at least created voids, like spatial voids in the Force. So I don't know if he was very happy with that. I mean, so if that's something that he really wanted, and so it's absolutely true. We don't have that equivalent yet, anyway, in the canonical, either in the books or in the in the films yet.
Right. Well, if anything, with Rebels, the Force took on more, even more of an immediate impact through nature, not to be manipulated by nature, but to be enhanced by nature, which I think is really kind of lovely too. I mean, I guess we're not trying to, just to be clear, Randy and I are trying to keep score about which is better, which is worse. We're just trying to point out just basically what works for us as people who love stories and storytelling.
A lot more symbolism in canon that different aspects of the Force can have kind of manifest themselves, and it's really cool. It's opposite of where there was nature that was affecting the Force in a negative way, in a limiting the Force's ability. Now you have these animals and these characters and creatures that are actually enhancing the Force user's experience and actually acting as a go-between or a mediator between the Force and maybe our characters that are it's enhancing their connection to the Force. Especially, I can kind of picture like Kanan, and Ezra on the back of the wolves as they dip down into the soil, or kind of dip down into kind of a wormhole. Like, do they have that ability to do that themselves? No, they're just along for the ride. And so
that's right.
Now, nature is enhancing their experience, and is acting as a mediator between our characters, our beings, and the Force itself, which is really, I like it either way.
Yeah.
But the new twist and the new presentation of nature and how the Force interacts with nature is really compelling and really cool.
I think it's also fresh that the Force is constantly evolving, and it's still something that is paramount to Star Wars, but it's not a Deus Ex Machina. It isn't a one size fits all that conquers everything. It certainly enhances or is there to help make things better, but in many ways it's still about choice and how we incorporate this great power into our lives. It's really not unlike spirituality for us as real people, which I think is pretty great.
Yeah, it's very cool, and I hope I look forward to seeing. I look forward to. I can't. I guess what I can't wait to see is how this is all to come to a conclusion, and keep that kind of inclusive kind of feel intact. In the Legends, one of the books that we talked about the last time we talked was Traitor, written by Matthew Stover, and that really drove home the idea that the good really was the will of the Force, and so we're still trying to figure out, is that still true? Those are the things that I'm kind of, because I'm being a pastor, like not only am I into like the sci-fi and like as Star Wars as an escape in an imaginary world where we can just escape and just immerse ourselves in something really fun, but also I'm trying to find like the nuances of spirituality and the nuances of truth versus like non-truth, or truth versus relativism, and or any other or fatalism, where. Sure. No matter what happens, it's all the will. It was all about that person's fate, and no matter what they chose, the Force had it all under control, and so all of those things. That is the mystery of, and I guess the adulthood of this fandom that I've experienced in the last few years, especially after hosting a podcast.
Right.
But isn't it amazing that, I can sit down with my son when he was little, and we can enjoy it for what it is. And then you and I, can talk about this in a podcast and talk about the depth of it all at the same time. It's just, and that's what's so cool
crazy
about Star Wars. Yeah.
It's great. It's a wonderful medium to share your thoughts and to get great feedback, because it does really affect, as we were talking about before the show started, the act of preparing for a show and the way it helps you think about things in a whole new way, which is really what we love. So let's go ahead and take a break. Wow, we could easily have just done the whole thing about the Force. Maybe we'll have to do like a multi-part Force examination, which would be fantastic. But we will take a break. When we come back, we will look more at these differences between the canonical Star Wars and the Legends line. And in the next segment, we're going to look at the main characters from Star Wars and how they are different. This is Coffee with Kenobi.
This is Coffee with Kenobi.
When you're a Star Wars collector, be it comics, books, or toys, it can be hard to keep track of everything you have. Gemmer is a free app for collectors that helps you solve that problem. You can join their Star Wars community, easily catalog your collection, and show off all your amazing stuff to a community of fellow fans. Just search for Gemmer, that's Gemr, in the app and Play Store now, and check it out. This is my favorite part of the show because I get to thank our CWK Patreon contributors that allow us to do so much for our show. Rebecca Raven, Dennis Keithley, Terry Lee, Ben Elkington, Melinda Wolf, Aaron Harris, Chris Kavarka, Angela Sauce, Mediocre Jedi, Jim Capron, Yancey Evans, Caroline Maselli, Tim Bungeroth, Chris Metz, LJ Souter, Thea Selby, Jeff Ellis, Daz Davies, Christian Dale, Jason Hall, Brian McKinney, Connie Shee, Mike Audette, Jared Cantor, BJ Smith, Eric Struthers, Nick Deco, and Mark Suter. CWK's Patreon page is a place where you can go and support our show and help us to do things we never would have done or been able to do without your incredible help and generosity. But it's not just something where you give us a donation. No, you actually get something pretty incredible in the meantime. And that would be something like our CWK Pour Over, which is a weekly podcast featuring myself, Tom Gross, and Corey Clubb. We talk about popular culture, Star Wars, of course, things going on in our lives, and a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff for Coffee with Kenobi. And it's only $5 a month for a weekly show. Here is a clip from the current one.
Okay, we can make it here.
That's right.
Let's continue to make good films in that type of genre. So, well, I think it's interesting about this too. You mentioned Black Panther kind of made it because of the dollar figure it made, and obviously it was a successful film. But a lot of these other ones, like I don't know how successful these were, other than obviously giving off a good piece of film. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like, well, I don't know how much money Roma made out from Netflix.
Not a ton.
Well, that's just interesting to me that like that dollar figure is such a weighty heft to be able to put these films in these categories, and if that's part of the, I think they weigh towards it.
They don't do it based, because there was going to be a category for most popular film, but then they got a huge debate. Well, how can you determine popular? Is it just movies? Aren't they already rewarded financially? So if anything, the Oscars tends to snub financially successful films, but that one was too big to ignore, and the landmark status that it had on culture as far as that goes. So I think that's why. The rest of them, I mean, if you're to get in the Academy, you have to be in the Screen Actors Guild. I mean, when I did the Tar commercial, I was invited to join the Screen Actors Guild. That was when we were breaking down the Oscars and the nominations for Best Picture and the impact that Black Panther has had on the Academy as well as popular culture. We really dive deeply into it, and we have a great time doing so. It's always a fun time, and you, again, can be a member by going to www.patreon.com/coffeewithkenobi or going to our webpage and finding the red button on the top right-hand side of the webpage, and you can start supporting Coffee with Kenobi and getting access to this, as well as find the other things you can get, like t-shirts, coffee mugs, access to CWK Lens, which is a video/picture thing. Think of, I guess, Snapchat or Instagram stories where you can get behind-the-scenes stuff, and sometimes things that happen on Coffee with Kenobi that you can find out before anybody else. So again, go to www.patreon.com/coffeewithkenobi and help support this show, as well as get access to CWK Pour Over. Even better, they even have a subscription service that is really convenient. Be sure to go to www.onenationcoffee.com and enter the code Kenobi10 to get 10% off your first order. This is the official brew of Coffee with Kenobi. We are back, and we originally talked about doing some plot differences, and we will, but that's so big because what do we say? There were 200 and what? How many Legends line books did we say?
100, and that's including all the young readers, Jedi Apprentice books, and all that stuff. So I don't know how many there are total, because it's really hard to determine what actually counts as a book or not. But it's over 200.
A whole bunch.
Yeah, more
than I have fingers and toes. That's fair to say.
Let's hope so.
Let's hope so, yes. So let's talk about Luke, Han, and Leia. Okay. Certainly Vader, the Emperor. I mean, my goodness. Again, maybe this topic was way too big for one show, and it probably is, but we're going to try to hit the main points. And the main points for many of us are Luke, Han, and Leia. What are some main differences between their personalities and what they're like as characters? And then again, different authors have a different spin, and sometimes representations don't always fit, at least for my money, with how I picture them to be. But again, when it's a Legends book or when it's a book period, the author has carte blanche to take what they find, the nuance and the intricacies of these characters, and breathe life of their own into them. So let's just look at Luke first. What do you think are some main differences with him? I mean, I'm sure The Last Jedi is going to come up with this.
I see the same frustrations that we have when we're talking about the Legends timeline, that a lot of people have with Luke, or even Mark Hamill himself had with Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. This kind of like this initial interpretation of him as a character, that he's weak, that he's staying out of conflict, that he's not interested in engaging, and I think that when you read through the Legends material, it's really hard as an author to not just to tell a compelling story when at any moment Luke can just come and save the day. You know, he's a powerful Jedi. He's a Jedi master at one point. So when you're telling a story and
it's like writing Superman,
right? Yeah. How do you have conflict with somebody that's the most powerful Jedi in the universe or in the galaxy, not just come and save the day? So a lot of the times authors were trying to relocate Luke or get him out of the way so they could actually create and tell a compelling story. And so then you have the idea of power creep, where, you know, all the Jedis would be more and more and more powerful, or they're pacifists. They're like, no, I don't want to get involved because I might turn to the dark side or whatever. You know, there's that drama. You know, it's like, oh, geez, another, you know, version of this or whatever. But it's the reason that frustration is there for Legends is because they're trying to tell a compelling story, and you're exactly right. You know, how do you tell a story and have a fight with Superman, you know, when, you know, he's just awesome. So, you know, as far as Luke goes, I think that there's that same kind of frustration is there for both fans to kind of pick at. And I think if you don't step back and really, you have to make a choice to appreciate where he was at as a person, you know, and as a character. And then once you're able to step back and really see a change, especially in The Last Jedi, you know, when he decides to engage in the battle, with an ability, by the way, that was all through Legends, and especially in the Legacy of the Force series, you know, teleporting your presence and then fighting in a battle.
Did it weaken you in the Legends line, like the way that it did him in The Force Awakens, or The Last Jedi, I mean?
Luke was always, you know, early on in the Legend stuff, Luke was always off trying to find something, right? He's always off trying to find Jedi information or old, you know, Jedi holocrons, or because they had to get him off planet or out of the conflict. But the cool thing is it actually worked, because I became really connected to other characters, the next generation, the Jaina and Jason Solo and Ben Skywalker, and all these other characters that Luke's absence gave breathing room for these younger characters to be developed. Jagged Fell, you know, all that you could go. The list goes on and on. So, you know, of the new characters that his absence gave room. But it did put Luke in a position where he was still whining a lot, kind of like in A New Hope, kind of like, you know, just at any point, again, he could show up and just be the, you know, Grand Master and just end the story at
right.
page, you know, at page 40 or whatever. But the purpose of story, he had to kind of step aside, which was kind of heroic in itself, you know. So
yeah, so he, you know, for The Last Jedi, I mean, you said it beautifully. He's so powerful and such a dominating presence that he could eradicate what he needed to right away. And they had a little bit of fun with that with The Last Jedi. And the first time I saw that film, I thought Luke was really doing those things I didn't know was a Force projection. But I feel like if he was really there, it would have been the exact same thing, because he is so strong with the Force. Or maybe he's not strong enough to take on ATM-6s blasting him like crazy and not have a scratch on him. But you know, that's part of him building up this legacy that very much is predominant in the Legends line post Return of the Jedi. And Rian Johnson was smart enough to take elements of that to showcase, hey, there is a legend of Luke Skywalker. You know it from the Legends line of books. Undoubtedly, the galaxy has had a lot of these things anyway. You know, there was a book of the legend of Luke Skywalker that was predominantly just myth and lore that was given, and the only canonical aspects of that book were when they were in the ship about to tell stories about Luke. Everything else is just stuff that may have happened or could have happened. And that was brilliant. To talk about a metacognitive approach to storytelling. So you come up with a conflict for Luke because he's so powerful. The only thing that he could really take him on would be himself. You know, we are our own worst critics. We are our own worst enemies. And Luke is no different than that. Just because he's incredibly powerful with the Force and he helped defeat the Emperor and Vader doesn't mean that he's perfect. And he wouldn't be any fun if he was.
Right.
In fact, it's the flaws in him that we see on full display that help us to relate to him, at least from my point of view. And so you'll have to help me. Are some of the more the books that are farther out from Return of the Jedi and the Legends line, do we see that kind of a doubting Luke? There's the Jedi Academy series, which I only read the first one of that. I'm not even sure how that ended up, but did we see elements of self-doubt and challenges with Luke?
Yes, even up to Legacy of the Force, Fate of the Jedi series. Those are the last two. Those are the last two series in the Legends line before it was stopped. And he actually had to give way because he was able to see the future, and there was no outcome where he didn't fall to the dark side. So he, as a matter of responsibility and making a choice, the right choice, he had to say, no, I can't go on that mission. Jaina, this is your job. You're going to have to take on Kaitis. The whole Fate of the Jedi, the first half of the Fate of the Jedi series, the very last series, he's literally taken out of the picture by Admiral Dalla, or Chancellor Dalla, or she becomes kind of like the head of the Republic. So that's a spoiler alert or whatever. But anyway, yeah, he's kind of taken out of. But you're right in that it's his absence, or how he's taken out, or why. The why is, it's still great storytelling, and it still develops him as a character. He's just not he's just not the big powerful Jedi that no one can defeat. He's fallible because it's a man versus man struggle, or man versus self struggle, not man versus man, but a man versus self struggle.
Right.
So, which I
think this is the most interesting in any walk of literature or film. I think that man versus self is the most relatable because it's the most like what we encounter as people.
Absolutely, and it takes in my opinion, this is just I'm not a literature teacher, but in my opinion, I feel that it takes the most amount of humility and serious introspection on the author's part, and invest self into the story itself, on the author's behalf, to really peel those layers of the onion away. And that's why I appreciate authors like Matthew Stover and James Luceno, because they have an ability to dig in and to peel some of those onion layers, even in themselves, in their own stories. That's courageous, and we see that as not only creative but bold, and that's why we like that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think it's more one of the reasons that we need heroes is that we need to see that someone can overcome great adversity on a much more dynamic level, so that when it comes to the smaller things that don't involve hunting down a dragon or overthrowing the empire, but they do mean, getting up the courage to ask that person out on a date, or to apply for that job, or to change careers, or to stand up to that person that's not being nice to you at work or at school. Those are heroic things in their own way, because we have to overcome our own walls, our own barriers, our own challenges. It's a very powerful thing. So we're through 2 segments already, and we've barely scratched the surface of this topic. So Randy, we're going to have to be sure, because I'm pretty sure in the 3rd segment we won't cover it all either. We're going to come back to this in the future, I would think.
Be fun.
It would be very fun. So let's take a break. When we come back, we will continue this. But first, Tom is going to bring us the latest Star Wars news. This is Coffee with Kenobi.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
For many of us, myself included, enjoying Star Wars isn't a hobby. It's a lifestyle. If you're a Star Wars fan, there's a good chance you're also a collector, be it toys, books, comics, or clothes. But how do you keep up with all the announcements and make sure you get the things that you want? How do you keep track of what you have? And how do you show off your awesome collection to people who are as passionate as you? That's where Gemmer comes in. It's the best app for organizing and displaying your collections, connecting with other Star Wars fans, and discussing all things happening a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Download the app for free by searching for Gemmer, that's Gemr, in the App Store or Play Store, and join their Star Wars Club today. With the recent news that Galaxy's Edge is going to have a number of novels to get us ready for the event, you're also thinking, all right, this is it. I've got to start saving for Galaxy's Edge. I need to plan this thing. You've got to go to MEI and Mouse Fan Travel. MEI is the amazing place to go to for signature service and expert advice to help clients maximize their vacation time and dollar. They can help your family enjoy everything the Disney theme parks and the cruise lines have to offer. They will plan every detail and share invaluable tips with you. I use them all the time for travel with Coffee with Kenobi, and they are amazing. Check out www.mousefantravel.com today and let them know Coffee with Kenobi sent you. We're back, and it is time for the news. Tom has brought us the latest Star Wars goodness. Tom, what's going on, buddy?
Yeah, a couple little ditties this week. Earlier in the week, Anthony Daniels posted on his Twitter page that, quote, "Today was 3PO's last on Episode 9. He's sad, and so am I." Then Daniels goes on to say that he's proud to have worked with a lovely, talented cast and crew led by JJ and Kathy. And he concludes by saying, quote, "I'll miss everyone, but I'm glad to know that we've been making something exceptional together to share with the waiting world." Daniels and C-3PO have the distinction of appearing on all 9 of the Star Wars films dating back to 1977. I guess that would be all 9 main Star Wars films, but it certainly feels like the end of an era, but it's one more step closer to the grand finale to take place this December.
Oh, the grand finale, that really hits me like a ton of bricks when you say that, but it's true. And to me, like, I don't even know what this means as far as how far along they are in filming and how big of a role he has, but this is a big deal. I mean, he's been in every Star Wars film. In Solo, he was a Wookiee. He wasn't a protocol droid that we know and love. But, I don't know. There was a part of me that read this in a cryptic fashion of he's done with Star Wars. But I guess it's kind of hard to say that. It's not like he would come out and say, oh, by the way, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, because no one really knows about that except for the people high up at Lucasfilm right now. But it definitely is a very powerful story that gives us something to really like, wow. This is really happening. This is really getting to where we're going to be in a movie theater eating popcorn and putting M&Ms in it.
Right. Yeah. It takes me back. And how many times we've said this over the last, 2 years or maybe just this year. But 40 years ago, when I watched him in the opening scene of, A New Hope as an 8-year-old in the theater, waddling there and avoiding all of the blaster bolts with R2-D2, the fact that, here we're looking and this week he's done, and I do feel like, and I don't know, we have no insight, but I do feel like this is sort of a, fond farewell. It's been wonderful. And who else gets to call it JJ and Kathy, right?
Yeah. Right.
It seemed very informal, but that's Anthony Daniels for you. But this is, to me, even though it's a small little story that popped up, to me it's so important because he has been just the heart and soul. And I go back also to when I'm thinking about in The Last Jedi, how he individually worked with all those actors in the Canto Bight scene and taught them how to be a droid. You hold your elbows like this and you move, you do the, and because he is the droid. He is walking proto,
he's the muse of droids.
He is. So big story this week. And our second story tonight is a Solo. Let's try this again. Solo, a Star Wars story, is now officially an Academy Award nominated movie, as the team from Industrial Light and Magic were nominated into the category of visual effects. So congratulations and good luck to Rob Brito and his team.
Not only is that awesome, but Adam Driver nominated for an Oscar for performance in Black Klansman.
So true. Yes,
So
that's right.
that's
Part
great.
of
Our Patreon show. Is that what you were going to say?
Well, I was just going to say part of our Star Wars family,
That's right.
even though it's not a Star Wars film, Adam Driver is as much as the Star Wars family as anyone else.
Oh my goodness. And don't say otherwise, because he's got a pretty scary red lightsaber.
Yeah. Right.
And I think
Exactly.
it's great to see Solo get some love, and the effects are wonderful. I've said this often, but if you watch on the Blu-ray or on the digital download extras, the way that they sequence and film hyperspace and light speed, and the way they make it come to life for the actors, it's just wonderful. It's just fantastic, and it's incredible work. I mean, that film is a great film, and I'm glad more and more people are coming to realize that, because they're finally getting the chance to see it. For whatever reason, not everyone went to the theater to see it, but it looks great. I mean, it's a beautiful canvas to tell a really awesome Star Wars story. So I think this is great news. And again, we talked about this in our Patreon show that came out last Sunday, but I'm such a big fan of the Oscars. So to me, this means a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not uncommon to have a Star Wars movie in one or two categories in the Academy Awards.
Right.
So this is great. And that's, typically, now I don't recall, Rogue One did it have some nominations?
I think they've pretty much all been nominated for effects in some way.
Some kind of effects or music
everything.
or yeah. So, but this is good. I agree with you. It's a nice tip of the hat to Solo, a Star Wars story that had some difficulties on the public scene. So this just giving that nod to this is quality. This is a quality story and production.
It really is. Well, hey, Tom, speaking of quality, you always bring the quality and the important aspects that we need to hear about in the Star Wars saga. So thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure, always.
Great. Let's go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we will return to my conversation with Randy about differences between the Legends line and the canonical Star Wars. This is Coffee with Kenobi.
This is Coffee with Kenobi.
Finding a place where you can be as passionate about Star Wars as we are can be tricky. But there is an app called Gemmer that was built just for collectors and fans to come together and hang out. Gemmer makes it easy to connect with people who care as much as you do in their Star Wars club. You can find the Gemmer app, that's GEMR, in the app and Play stores for free. Check it out today. One Nation Coffee is the official brew of Coffee with Kenobi. I start my morning every day with One Nation Coffee because it is the best. You can start your coffee subscription so you never miss out on the best coffee in the galaxy by going to www.onenationcoffee.com today. Plus, enter the code Kenobi10 to set up a coffee subscription and save 10% off your first order. We are back, and as always, Randy brings an amazing perspective that I know has a lot of people thinking. I appreciate Randy. I appreciate you very much and what you bring to the table on this topic. Man, this is good stuff.
It is. This is why we started podcasting.
That's exactly right. So, okay, so we talked about the Force. We started talking about all the different characters and their changes, but we only got through a thumbnail of Luke, because Luke is a very complex character. We could go through specific books and things like that, but there's just not enough coffee in the pot to do that. So I'm going to leave it up to you. Do you want to talk about Han and Leia? Do you want to talk a little bit about the galaxy? Do you want to turn to the dark side? Where do you think we should go with this last little segment? With the understanding that we're going to come back to all these topics in the near future.
Yeah, maybe we should leave it. Just kind of leave that. I think that there are changes. The biggest amount of change is really in Han Solo. Leia is maybe not so. It's still big change, obviously, but again, we don't have the benefit of seeing the next movie, so
sure.
That's going to have a huge impact. Maybe we have this conversation after that. That would be amazing.
Well,
and then also the whole Mandalorian story and how the Mandalorians and how they've now been presented as pacifists, where before they were not. That actually has pretty big implications.
Let's do that then. Let's go into Mandalorian culture, because I know that was it Karen Travis that had all those Mandalorian books?
Yeah,
I don't know as much about those books. Let's talk about that. Let's have this last minute be about the Mandalorians.
So with the Mandalorian, what Karen Travis did is she really created a subculture inside of the Star Wars universe, and all the way down to creating a Mandalorian language. That she actually created a Mandalorian language to where kind of people are learn the terminology and stuff, and it's really cool, Dan, just to kind of get immersed in that. But it was based on kind of a militant culture, and run hard, shoot straight, die with honor, all that kind of stuff. And that was kind of the foundation of the clones and the clone army, and they all and the Republic commandos. They all had that real that honor about their role in the war. And to see in the Clone Wars, to see Mandalore turn to a system of pacifism really threw a wrench in the legends, and that's why ultimately.
Are you talking about in Clone Wars before?
Yes, absolutely.
Before Death Watch took over.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So before it was all, before that, and as it was tracking along, as Karen Travis was telling these stories, everyone's like, yeah, that's why people love Mandalorian so much, is because of this is from my perspective and the people that I'm talking to, especially when it comes to Legends and the Republic Commando books, and how Karen Travis inserts Mandalorian culture into the Legacy of the Force series and Peripheral books. She really created a subculture that people really love. And so when you see, people that really are into Mandalorian culture, that's the culture that they fell in love with. And then all of a sudden, Mandalore is a pacifist system, with Duchess Satine at its head. It's like, that isn't anything like what we really fell in love with. And that's what ultimately led to her no longer being an author for Star Wars. And again, another one of those storylines that was abruptly shut down, where we never got to see the conclusion of any of those storylines.
So how about this? So after Death Watch takes over, and then we see, of course, later on, the House of Ren and Sabine's clan. And, there was basically a civil war going on in Mandalore. So a lot of things were going on. Was that more reflective of Karen and Travis's world of Mandalore? Or was that even different too?
I would say that, that the in Rebels, that kind of clanism or whatever that is, like where there's like clan families, that was pretty close to Karen Travis and what she kind of was creating as she was, given one story after another to write. And then the one Mandalore, that was kind of in there because Boba Fett actually ended up becoming the Mandalore, like the one leader of. But by then, there was hardly anything to lead because Mandalore had been attacked. They had no leader for the longest time, and so I think, and what I'm hoping is that the new Mandalore, the Mandalore TV live action series, kind of brings some of that fighting honor back, and I'm hoping that it brings Mandalorians kind of back into the forefront of the storytelling, because there is a huge percentage of Star Wars fans where the Mandalorian culture was really a big part of their fandom, and you see that with all the Mandalorian mercs and all the cosplayers and all that kind of stuff.
Well, some of the local friends of mine in the 501st here in Central Illinois, a lot of them were really upset, and so they stopped reading Legends books because, or stopped reading Star Wars books because they did away with everything that she did for Mandalore. But I still don't really know specifically, besides it being pacifism, what are some other major changes? I mean, obviously that's a huge change. I mean, that's a whole philosophy. That's a cultural thing.
Right. And I would say that was the biggest. That was the biggest change, and I think that was enough for. That's a large enough, because that was such an underpinning or underlying theme for all Mandalorian culture. When Jaina goes and she trains with Boba Fett and trains with the Mandalorian so she can acquire the extra skills to kill Darth Caedus. And we get someone that is on the outside now learning, and as we're watching or reading along, we're getting educated, we're getting trained just at the same time Jaina is, right? Because we're reading and we're observing this change happening from a formal fighting style to like going berserk like a Mandalorian.
Sure.
It's that kind of that underpinning or that undercurrent of a theme that when you take it out and you take out honor and sacrifice and fighting and Mandalorian mothers raising their children up to be warriors. I mean, that is substantial, and that's a huge identity thing. You take that out, and you have, the Duchess Satine and the pacifism of Mandalore. That's a whole other kind of that's a 180 turn from what everyone kind of, and a lot of those Mandalorian friends of yours that are cosplayers, like that's what draws them to that world and draws them to that particular part of the storyline. And so though it's only one change, it's large enough to have an effect to where it really did rock the world of fans, especially that are, where Mandalore and Boba Fett was the center of their fandom.
And we haven't even really talked specifically about Boba Fett, because his character in the Legends line versus the films and what we've seen of him growing up in Clone Wars, I think those are vastly different too. I almost get the impression, and I have no inside knowledge on this, but I almost get the impression that when we get to see the live action The Mandalorian, I feel like that's going to be a little more reflective of how we always pictured Boba Fett before we got his backstory in Attack of the Clones.
I would agree, and I think if the more it is that, the more that side of fandom will kind of be redeemed, or not really redeemed, but kind of bring them
the bridge.
Yeah. So, and if somehow somebody could kind of retcon this change into where it, is, if there's a story somewhere along the way that could retcon all of this to where, because if I'm to be completely honest about the Clone Wars version, it's not bad. It's just not the Mandalorian. They're both good stories, but to choose one or the other, which of course as fans, super nerd fans we tend to be like so polarizing in our opinions, especially with the internet and being able to be vocal about our opinions. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way. This is one of those situations where it was a direct conflict. And so, yeah, I hope that there's some way to bridge that difference to where, and I, it won't matter, because if there isn't a bridge, if that bridge never happens, I think that Mandalorian fans watching a live action Mandalorian TV show are still going to be so pumped up. I know I'm pumped up about it. So,
I am too. Even this conversation even got me more excited, because I never thought about pulling in those aspects. I wonder if people will be more tempted to dive back into those Mandalorian culture books based on that alone. Wow, Randy, we're out of coffee and we barely scratched the surface of this topic. As I said earlier, I love to have you back on. We've got our top fives, we've got our Star Wars mysteries explained, and we've got now comparing the Legends line to the canonical Star Wars, and not necessarily one-to-one comparisons, but kind of what's the same, what's different, what's inspired what we have now, and what is kind of gone the way of the dodo. Again, thank you, Mr. Daft Prawn, for giving us this idea. Who knew it would explode into this? Wow.
Well, and also, I think we are serving our all of us, those that are speaking and those that are listening. We are serving the thing that we are fans of, which is Star Wars. We are serving our fandom the best when we are encouraging one another and leaving room for differences of opinion.
Yes,
and I think that that is what has to keep our that's what sets us apart. That has to set us apart. That love for one another in allowing differences of opinion is what Star Wars makes Star Wars fandom special.
Here. Well said. Well, if people would like to hear more from you about the Star Wars Legends line or anything Star Wars related, where can they reach out to you if they want to ask you a question or just say hello?
We're on the best way is on Twitter at Legends Library, Facebook Legends Library Podcast. You can send us an email at legendslibrary@coffeewithkenobi.com. And so, yeah, I've been threatening. I dare anyone to send me an email. I haven't had an email in so long because it's all about Twitter and Facebook nowadays. But I haven't had an email in so long. I dare somebody to email me because I haven't had an email in like 6 months or something crazy like that. So it'd be fun to get an email or send out smoke signals or something like that.
All right. Well, the Infinity Gauntlet has been thrown down. There you go. Randy, thank you again, as always, for being on the show. This was awesome.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for the invite, and I can't wait to continue the conversation.
Let's take a break and close out the show. This is Coffee with Kenobi.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are the podcast you're looking for. This is...
Before we get to email, I want to thank our CWK sponsor,
Jimmer,
One Nation Coffee, and Mouse Fan Travel. Be sure to support them the way they support our podcast, and remember to listen to new and archive shows of Coffee with Kenobi wherever you listen to podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Podcast Addict, Stitcher, Spreaker, Overcast, Blog Talk Radio, Player FM, or our website, www.coffeewithkenobi.com, or wherever you enjoy listening to your favorite shows. And if you listen to the show through iTunes, please leave us a review. We are also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, where you can find some past videos of our CWK Coffee Chat, Pinterest, and Tumblr, and we'd love for you to check us out there. Be sure to listen to our CWK family of shows too, including Legends Library, Resistance Reactions, Comics with Kenobi, and Lattes with Leia. Please leave a review for each of their shows as well, and be sure to subscribe to each of them individually, as they all have their own feeds now. In addition to the places I just mentioned for Coffee with Kenobi, you can find me twice a month on the podcast Looking at Lucasfilm, part of the Jim Hill Media Network, as well as on Twitter at Mr. Zaher, MRZEHR, and you can find my writing on CWK's website, as well as StarWars.com, where I'm an official blogger there, and on IGN, where I contribute articles on Star Wars, as well as other popular culture topics. Don't forget to check out www.patreon.com/coffeewithkenobi to help support the show, as well as get access to CWK Pour Over, which is our podcast, our weekly podcast, not heard anywhere else. There are also t-shirts, coffee mugs, and so many more opportunities and ways for you to not only support the show, but get something pretty cool out of it as well.
That's going to do it for show number 163 of Coffee with Kenobi. A big thank you to Randy Therio and Tom Gross for joining us today. Be sure to tune in next week, where my son, Mason Z, will return to give his initial thoughts on his first ever viewing of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. It's awful cute. I am a little biased because I'm his dad, but trust me, it's going to be a ton of fun. Thank you as always for joining me for a cup of coffee. We will be back next week for more Star Wars conversation with some of your favorite Star Wars personalities. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here. Move along.